The night Daniel found her standing in the kitchen in his jacket, he understood something he'd been carefully not understanding for almost 8 months. His name was Daniel Rowe, 38 years old. He did finish carpentry, mostly restoration work. Old houses that needed their bones put back in order, crown molding matched from scratch, window frames rebuilt so they closed the way they were supposed to. He was good at it. He liked the patience it asked of him. He had been divorced for 2 years from a woman named Claire, who had loved the idea of a man who worked with his hands right up until that man came home smelling like sawdust and had nothing interesting to say about her coworkers. They had parted without much theater. He had moved into the 2-bedroom apartment on Millhaven Street not because he needed the space, but because his friend Joel had found him the listing and told him it would do him good to not be alone in a 1-bedroom with a ceiling fan and his own thoughts. Joel had been partially right. Daniel had found a roommate through the building's notice board, a woman named Nora, who was 34, worked in landscape architecture, and had left a broken engagement somewhere in her recent past in a way she did not offer details about, and he did not ask for. She paid her half of the rent on time. She left coffee in the pot when she made it. She was quiet in the mornings and said goodnight from the hallway before she went to bed. It was a reasonable arrangement. He had been very disciplined about keeping it that way. He had taken a job out in Harwick that was supposed to run 3 days, but finished ahead of schedule because the client changed the scope and Daniel had the paneling done by noon on Wednesday. He drove home in the dark, 3 hours on the highway with the radio low. It was a few minutes past 3 in the morning when he parked in the lot and let himself in through the side entrance, the one that didn't creak. He didn't turn on the hallway light because Nora's door was closed and the line under it was dark, and he'd been raised by people who understood that courtesy was mostly just not making noise when noise wasn't necessary. He set his bag down in his room. He pulled off his boots. He was heading toward the kitchen for a glass of water when he saw her. She was standing at the counter with her back to him in the yellow wash of the range hood light, which she always left on low when she went to bed. She was wearing an old flannel-lined work jacket that had been hanging on the hook by the door for so long that Daniel had stopped seeing it as clothing and thought of it more as a fixture. Her feet were bare. She had her hands wrapped around a mug. She hadn't heard him come in. Her hair was down, which he almost never saw because she kept it clipped up during the day. The jacket was 3 sizes too large for her. The sleeves came halfway down her hands. He stood in the doorway and didn't say anything for a moment, not to be strange, but because he genuinely did not know what the appropriate first word was. It was 3 in the morning. She was in his jacket. She thought she was alone. There was a kettle still cooling on the burner, and the room smelled like chamomile and the faint cedar that the jacket had held since he'd bought it at an estate sale 6 years ago. "Hey," he said. Nora turned around so fast she nearly sloshed the mug. Her expression went through about 4 things in 2 seconds. Then she set the mug down on the counter with the very careful deliberateness of someone who has decided that composure is now the only option available. "You weren't supposed to be back until Friday," she said. "Job wrapped early." "Okay." She looked down at the jacket, then back at him. "I can explain this. I figured you could." It was cold. She said it the way someone says the single true thing when they know the single true thing is going to sound insufficient. The heat was doing that thing again where it cuts out between 2 and 4. "I was going to put it back before you got home." "You can keep it on," he said. "I'm not cold." She did not take it off. She did pick the mug back up. He got his glass of water from the tap and stood there in the kitchen with her in the quiet, and neither of them said anything for a moment that was slightly longer than strictly necessary for 2 people who were just getting water. "You want to sit down?" she said. "I'm not going back to sleep anyway." He said yes, which was honest, because he wasn't tired either. This would be a useful place to tell the part about Marcus, because without Marcus the rest of it is harder to understand. Marcus was Nora's ex-fiancé. Daniel knew about him the way you know about weather in a city you've never been to, from the residual effects. Marcus had called twice in the first month she moved in, both times during dinner, both times leaving her standing in the hallway, speaking in a voice that had gone very flat and controlled. He was from money in the particular way that teaches a man to use calm as a weapon. He was the kind of person who framed every conversation as a problem he was generously helping you understand. He had, Daniel gathered from the fragments, spent 3 years making Nora feel like her professional ambitions were charming but not quite serious. Her friendships were fine but slightly beneath the standard he'd set, and her opinions were interesting but mostly worth revising. She had figured this out in the way you figure out that a room has no windows, gradually, then all at once. The engagement had ended 7 months before she moved into Millhaven Street. Daniel knew all of this because her friend Petra had come to dinner once, about 2 months in, and Petra had the useful social quality of not moderating herself very much. Nora had gone to get more wine, and Petra had looked at Daniel and said, You seem steady. She needs steady right now. Marcus was the kind of man who thought emotional unavailability was a personality type. Then Nora had come back, and Petra had changed the subject without any visible seams. Daniel had filed all of this under things that were not his business, and had gone about his life accordingly. He had been very good about it for 8 months. He was somewhat less good about it at 3 in the morning in the kitchen, with her sitting across the table from him in his jacket, and her hair down, the range hood light making everything amber and slow. "How was the job?" she said. "Clean. Old Victorian out in Harwick. The client wanted the library paneling matched. Previous owner had done some damage." "Did you get it to match?" "Close enough that you'd have to know what you were looking for." She smiled at the mug. "You always say that like it's not impressive." "It's just pattern recognition," he said. "You look long enough at the original, the copy starts to tell you what it needs." She looked up at that. He wasn't sure why. He took a drink of water. "Petra thinks I should start seeing people again," she said. It was slightly abrupt. He recognized it as the kind of thing someone says when they've been thinking it for a while and decide to just release it into the room and see what happens. "What do you think?" he said. "I think I'm not sure I trust my own judgment yet." She said it plainly, without self-pity, the way you state a fact about a measurement you've taken. Marcus was very convincing. I was convinced for 3 years. That's not a fast thing to repair. "No," Daniel said, "it isn't." "Does that seem dramatic to you?" "Not even slightly." She looked at him. Outside, somewhere down the block, a car started and pulled away. The kettle ticked as it cooled. "You're not the kind of man who says things he doesn't mean," she said. "I've noticed that." "I try not to." "It's unusual." She turned the mug a quarter turn on the table. "Petra also thinks I should tell you something." "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to tell me." "No," she said. "I know I don't." She was quiet for a moment. "But I borrowed your jacket because it smells like cedar and old wood, and the thing you use on the saw blades, whatever that is, and I've been borrowing it on cold nights for about 6 weeks, and I'd been hoping to get through the whole winter without you noticing." The kitchen was very quiet. He could hear the refrigerator hum. "6 weeks," he said. "Give or take." He set his glass down. "Why would you want to get through the winter without me noticing?" She gave him a look that was about 2.5 things at once. "Because you're my roommate, Daniel, and you've been genuinely decent to me, and I didn't want to make it something it wasn't." "What would it be?" "I don't know." She said it honestly. "That's the part I haven't worked out." He didn't say anything to that. There were several things he could have said, and he considered them and set them aside. Outside, the first pale suggestion of 4 in the morning was somewhere far off to the east. "I'm going to go get a few hours of sleep," she said. She stood up and wrapped both hands around the mug to carry it to the sink. "Nora." She turned. "Keep the jacket," he said. "It looks better on you anyway." She stood there for a moment with the mug in both hands and looked at him with an expression he didn't have a clean word for. Then she set the mug in the sink and went to bed. He did not sleep much. The next day was a Thursday. He had no job on the calendar until Monday, and he'd planned to spend the day doing light work on a chair he was restoring in the garage space below the building. He did that for most of the morning. Nora left for a site visit at 8 and came back a little after 2 with a roll of drawings under her arm and her hair clipped back the way she always wore it. She said hello. He said hello. She made tea. It was the most ordinary afternoon of his life, and he was acutely aware of every 10 minutes of it. She spread the drawings on the dining table and worked with a pencil in her hand, occasionally turning the roll a different direction, occasionally setting the pencil down and looking at something for a long time. He read a book on the couch. At some point he became aware that neither of them had spoken for about 2 hours, and it was not uncomfortable in the least, which struck him as information. Around 5, her phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face went still in the particular way it went still when she was deciding something. She let it ring 3 times, then stepped into the hallway and answered it. He turned a page of his book and did not read a word of it. He could hear the register of her voice, not the words. It stayed flat and controlled the way it always did when she was managing something she didn't want to manage. After about 4 minutes, she came back in, set the phone face down on the table, and sat down in front of her drawings. "Marcus," she said. It wasn't a question. "None of my business," Daniel said. "He wants to meet for coffee." She turned the pencil end over end. "He says he's been thinking and he believes we were hasty." Daniel looked at his book. "What do you think?" "I think the last 6 months of my life have been the first 6 months in 3 years where I've slept well." She said it flatly. "I think that tells me something." He didn't say anything. "He's always been very reasonable about it," she said. "That's the thing. He never yells. He never makes demands. He just makes you feel like the unreasonable one for not coming back around to his perspective." She paused. "Anyway, I told him no." "Good," Daniel said. She looked up. Looked. He'd said it without ornamentation, just the single word, and she seemed to receive it as such. "Petra says I need to stop making every decision out of opposition to Marcus," she said. "She says I need to start making decisions toward something instead." She tilted her head. "She's usually right, which is annoying." "What are you making decisions toward?" he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at her drawings. "I haven't gotten that specific yet." He turned another page of his book. On Saturday morning she made waffles. He didn't know she made waffles. It turned out she made very good waffles, with blueberries in them. And she put the coffee on before he was up and had set a mug at his place without asking how he took it, because in 8 months she had apparently learned how he took it without comment. He sat down across from her and ate waffles on a Saturday morning in November, and there was frost on the window above the sink, and the kitchen was warm. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "After last night, I figure I should probably be nervous," he said. "You probably should." She drank her coffee. "Are you always this careful?" He looked at her. "Depends what I'm trying not to break." She didn't answer right away. She set her mug down and looked at the table, and when she looked back up, her expression had shifted into something quieter and more direct. "Well," she said, "for the record, I'm not made of glass?" He held that. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere 2 blocks down, which was a strange sound for November, but people made stranger decisions. "I know you're not," he said. "Then stop being so careful." She said it simply, not as an accusation, just as a fact she'd arrived at and was offering across the table. "I borrowed your jacket for 6 weeks. I think that's already past careful." "Fair point," he said. "Are you going to do anything about it, or are we going to keep having breakfast until spring?" He reached across the table and turned her coffee mug a quarter turn so the handle faced her hand properly. It was a small thing. She watched him do it. Then she reached over and put her hand over his on the mug. They stayed like that for a moment. "I'd like to take you somewhere," he said, "if you want." "I'd love that," she said. He took her to the Mill District on Sunday, where he had a project in a building that was being converted, an old textile place with floors that hadn't been touched in 60 years and windows that looked out over the river going gray in November. He showed her the crown molding he was matching on the 3rd floor, the original bracket from 1908 that he was using as his reference. She stood close to it and looked at it carefully and asked him questions that were precise and interested and demonstrated that she understood what she was looking at. She was trained to read materials and spaces. He'd known this, but he hadn't seen it before. "The grain on this one runs slightly different," she said, running a finger along the bracket. "Yeah, quarter sawn versus flat sawn. You can fake it at distance, but up close it tells." "You said that before," she said, "that things tell you what they need." "They usually do," he said. "You just have to stand still long enough." She turned and looked at him. There was dust in the air, and the afternoon light coming through the industrial windows was pale and long and made the floor look like something from a photograph. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him, "about pattern recognition. It applies to most things." "Yes," she said, "it does." She looked at him steadily. "I've been recognizing a pattern for about 6 weeks now." "What kind of pattern?" "The kind where you come home and the apartment is better," she said. "The kind where I sleep differently when I know you're one room over. The kind where I borrowed a jacket and then started borrowing reasons to stay up until you turned your light off." She said all of this the way she said most true things, plainly, without decoration, watching his face as she said it. "I wanted to tell you before you talked yourself out of it." He looked at her. Outside, the river moved. "I wasn't going to talk myself out of it," he said. "I was going to wait until I was sure you were ready." "I'm telling you I'm ready," she said. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair back from her face gently, the way you handle something you are not careless with. She leaned into it slightly. He kissed her once, carefully, and she put her hand flat against his chest and kissed him back in a way that was not careful at all. They stood in the mill building in the November light for a while, and neither of them said anything, and it was entirely sufficient. That was almost 2 years ago now. The heat in the Millhaven apartment got fixed in December finally by a building manager who had been promising to fix it since September. Nora didn't return the jacket. He didn't ask for it. It lives on the hook by the door, and they each grab it when they're running out for something quick, and neither of them considers this arrangement remarkable. Marcus sent one more message in February, carefully worded, describing his continued availability and his certainty that time would provide perspective. Nora read it, handed Daniel the phone so he could read it too, and then deleted it. He handed the phone back, and they went out to dinner and did not discuss Marcus at any further length, which was the correct amount of discussion. Petra came to dinner regularly through the spring and announced at every occasion that she had seen this coming from the first week, which was probably true and which they allowed her to claim without contest because she had earned it. The big thing happened on a Sunday in October back in the Mill District 3rd floor, the crown molding finished and installed. Daniel had brought her back to see it completed, and she stood in the finished room with her hands in her pockets and turned slowly, reading the space. He watched her do it. Then he reached into his jacket pocket, his jacket, not hers, the second one, the one he'd bought specifically, and said her name. She turned around and looked at what was in his hand and then looked at him, and her expression did the thing it had done in the kitchen the first night, moving through several things quickly before settling into something clear and certain. "Yes," she said, before he'd finished the question. They went to dinner afterward in a small place near the river with mismatched chairs and paper napkins and a chalkboard menu that, as Daniel noted to her, used 4 separate adjectives to describe the potatoes. She laughed in a way that carried through the whole room. He poured the wine, and she held out her left hand just to look at it, and then looked back at him. "You were careful for a long time," she said. "You were worth being careful about," he said. She turned her hand over on the table, and he put his over it, and the candle between them burned low, and the night outside the window was cold and clear, and they were nowhere near done with it. Here's what Daniel thinks about now when he thinks about that night at 3 a.m. with the range hood light and the chamomile and the jacket too large for her shoulders. He thinks that the careful thing would have been to go back to bed. He thinks that the careful thing would have been to say good night and let her make her way back to her room and continue the arrangement that was already working fine. He thinks that careful is sometimes just fear with better manners. And he thinks that if you want the truth to mean something, you have to stay in the room long enough to hear it said.